And we're recording. Welcome to the first Kubernetes SIG network meeting of 2020. The first item on the list is appropriately issue triage, PR triage.
We hadn't decided what we were going to do before, but I have both queued up, so I can do either of them.
Awesome. It looks like we did PR triage last time in December, so maybe we should switch back to issue triage and we'll just alternate.
Okay.
Take it away, Dan.
Okay, is this working?
Yeah, looks good.
I can see it.
Okay, headless service configurable priority and weight values. This sounds like a feature. And somebody has already suggested filing a KEP. So we can just ping the IPVS mode cannot access cluster IP port when node reboot. Anyone have any idea about this or feel like taking a IPVS bug?
The usual black hole for destination for IPVS bugs is
Andrew?
Yeah, sorry, brain paused there for a second. Is Andrew here? I feel bad assigning him bugs in absentia.
Oh, Andrew, I thought you said the usual black hole for IPVS bugs is injured. I was thinking.
Probably also worth just reminding that you don't need to fix the bug. It's just
this is triage.
Looking into next steps, triaging.
Anybody else want to step up for this before we assign it to Andrew? Anybody who's using IPVS and wants to know it a little better? You don't need to fix it, just triage.
Or if we feel guilty about assigning it to people who aren't here, we could just skip this and assign it next time.
We could. Is he even tagged on here at all? Is he going to be aware of it?
Probably, no.
Let's just send it his way, and then if he wants to reassign it, he can.
Okay. User space proxy.
Do we need to remove the triage on that one?
No, we should remove the triage after they've confirmed that it's either a bug or a feature or something.
Okay.
Priority of unserviced updates should be higher than ensure portals. It says user space proxy. Dan, do you want this or do you want me to take it?
Sounds like they will have a PR, so.
Hey, if you want to take it, go ahead.
All right. Core DNS behaves unexpectedly. Cannot work as domain name. HA cluster.
Do we have Chris O'Haver or Sandeep on the line? It's fine. You can assign it to me.
It's already assigned to Chris.
Oh, it's already. Oh, Chris is already.
He's already on it.
Okay.
Next.
Uh,
Oh, it's from November. Sorry.
He removed his assignment.
I see.
What is the behaves unexpectedly labeled? Is there more?
He's punting to Q proxy at the end.
Oh, I see. Something wrong with Q proxy. Blah 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 blah. Let me look at this.
You want it, Bowie?
Okay, send it to me.
Send it to Bowie.
I should remain silent.
You moved your hand.
That's an option.
As it did.
Need test of cube mark drop. So yeah,
I
this
think
is
you can remove triage on this.
yeah. Anybody feel like signing up to write a test case?
Yeah, I can take it on. This is Rob.
Rob Scott?
Yeah.
Should not log, not saving endpoints if the service doesn't need health check. Yeah, this is stupid logging in the generic kubeproxy service code.
It's also a log level 3, so I don't know if I have to go look at the context if it's a useful thing. I guess we can remove triage. It seems like a legit bug. You could add the help wanted label. Like this is an easy one for somebody to jump on.
What's the command for that?
/ add label help wanted.
I think there's a specific shortcut for it.
Oh,
Or is it just
label?
/ help wanted? Is there also
okay.
a good first issue label?
There is.
Help.
That looks good.
Yeah, looks like it was help. Okay.
Oh, is that what / help is? I don't
Yep.
know if that actually.
Is it? It doesn't show up.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like, you need help. That would be bad.
Oh, no, the description of the label says it's we need help.
Okay. Oh, you switched to the next issue. Sorry, I was looking at the labels. I was like, well. It didn't
Oh,
work.
yeah, no, it did. Yeah. Whoops.
Refresh.
Help wanted. Yep. So, okay. Kubernetes service override. Oh, how far are we going? We're going to 5 or 15 past?
Sure.
Okay. Kubernetes service override security groups with AWS extra SG annotations. This sounds like a cloud provider thing and not networky at all.
SIG-Oz.
But that's not a SIG, right? That's an air. Is it a SIG or an area? Sorry, I talked over you. What did you say, Tim?
You're right.
You misspelled remote there, Dan.
Yeah. So, do we know the command?
No, I don't remember their value for you.
All right, I'll just leave this open and come back to it afterwards.
Thanks.
Kubeproxy, Vnix, and HNS endpoints of containers are being deleted despite passing hostname override. This looks like another one that is
Same.
okay. Port pod environment source get host IPv6. Does anybody know if the downward API was updated
Yeah,
to
it
do
does.
pod IPs?
It
Yeah.
was updated to support pod IPs plural.
In 117. So
117.
give that, Anish, can you take that one?
Yeah, I can take this one.
Awesome.
ARAMAC.
AR.
That the first one.
Okay.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Same to you.
Does not populate node spec pod slider. This looks more like node than network.
We technically own that field.
Okay. Now they're talking like KubeADM. Actually, there's a lot of discussion here already anyway. We appreciate feedback from SIG Network. So who knows about this?
I used to know about it. You can assign it to me and I'll see what I can find. Unless somebody wants to jump in.
You could assign it to me too.
Okay.
Oh,
That was Casey.
That was Casey.
Too bad.
using a voice modulator, you can get away. A random person.
Request pod itself via service failed when kubeproxy is IPVS. This is a hairpin problem. And nobody is responding. Assign that to Andrew.
Yeah, I guess so. Don't we have an EDE test on that? I'm sure we do, because I remember jumping through hoops to make it work. And
We have an EDE hairpin test, but it probably only runs against IP tables.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, that's quarter past.
All right, so we don't get to the all Chinese one.
Oh, that'll wait
Thank you, Dan.
And if you feel so inclined, can go through and load up the same list of bugs with triage and do triage outside of the group. Just saying.
Yeah, if anyone wants to triage an all Chinese bug, it's 85741.
Any native speakers, honestly, would be super helpful if they can translate.
Rob, Scott, I think you're up next.
Sure. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to bring some attention to a KEP that we added that is pretty simple to add app protocol to services and endpoints. The idea here is just to make it a little bit easier to work with load balancers. And I'm sure there are other use cases as well. This has been a few issues related to this for, I think, years now. And the suggestion was, well, we could just add app protocol to services and endpoint ports. This has already gotten a decent amount of discussion. And I think general consensus is it's acceptable, although it doesn't solve all the problems, it solves a problem. But I just wanted to bring it up because it is a change and wanted to give SIG Network a chance to give any additional feedback in this meeting.
So I asked that we bring it here. I'm specifically concerned with, can anybody think of reasons why this might be a really bad idea? I can't think of any, and that usually scares me.
I think there is one, there is no standard what the APP protocol should be. Like for example, for the TLS, should it be TLS or SSL or HTTP, like HTTP 1.1, like including protocol version, things like that. So unless we have a
we wrote the comments specifically saying you should, if you can, use IANA service names, which are called out in an RFC. But you can use the prefix to define your own. So you can have company.com/myspecialthing, or you can say HTTPS, which is the IANA specified protocol name. And actually, I think IANA says HTTPS, TLS, and maybe a couple of other names all mean the same thing.
Gotcha.
So maybe we should establish convention around like use the canonical ones like HTTPS, but the other ones, if you're implementing, should probably still be supported.
Clarification question: what's the exact use case of consuming this?
So we find cases where like a load balancer wants to know whether the back end should be TLS encoded or not, or just as a hint for like, I don't know, what were the examples, Rob? I forget them now. It was the TLS on the backside was the important one.
Yeah, this has been solved, shall we say, with annotations that are frustrating to work with and not consistent across clouds.
I think all three of the major US clouds have different annotations that mean the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So this is seen hopefully as a standard way to
does the same thing too.
solve this.
Sorry, somebody was just talking and I couldn't hear you. You were really quiet.
Sorry, I work on Contour, which is an ingress controller, and we solve it the same way. We have a custom annotation that we tell people to put on the service.
Great. So you would use this if it was standardized?
Yeah, we would use this. We also recently let people do it on our custom CRD, and that was added for Knative.
Okay.
Is there, would it be possible to have multiple APIs per port? Sorry, multiple protocols per port.
Is there a use case for that?
I mean, like, would you put gRPC in there and then?
I think gRPC would be a valid one. It's not an IANA one.
Yeah, but it would share, for example, the same HTTPS, HTTP2. There's like some multiplexing potentially.
Yeah, I mean,
if we care.
That's a good question. Okay.
Like, for example, the ALPN TLS negotiation has like a list or something, which was the other thing that I think was similar to this. Of course, we don't want to get crazy.
Yeah. Does gRPC imply HTTP2? I think it does, right? There's not like another transport.
But you can multiplex your port.
Yeah.
I've done that before.
I thought for some reason you could also do it over TCP.
Yeah, you could conceivably have something that's handling the HTTP level that isn't aware of the gRPC details.
It might be worthwhile for people who have implemented this. We just look at how we could conceivably support these.
I don't know. Yeah.
Things and what it would mean. Like maybe it doesn't matter because it doesn't really have a effect. Like if you put like TLS, that's sufficient for
the lowest common denominator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you had, so I don't know gRPC's guts very well. If I had a load balancer that understood HTTP2 but not gRPC, would I decorate this as HTTP2? Or would I need to decorate it as gRPC and not get any benefits?
Yeah, that one, maybe we just have people comment who have implemented it.
Okay.
If it matters. Like maybe it just doesn't matter and it's sufficient to have one value there. Or you would need to support negotiation. But that's really on the load balancer side where that would be relevant.
It doesn't sound like probably a comment period until we don't have it. Unless somebody is implementing a load balancer so they really need this for some reason and they support it. I'm skeptical of it.
I guess we have a path for pluralizing things.
I was just going to say, we've charted this course, so we can always turn it into a plural if we have to. So I guess this is a call for objectors. Otherwise, we'll proceed. Rob, were you planning to feature gating or just go straight?
I was not planning on feature gating since it is additive only.
And actually has no implementation.
And it has no implementation other than endpoint slices will inherit this from services. Otherwise, yeah. There's a question in chat. Won't this bring some confusion to kubeproxy?
Can whoever posted that expand on that?
Hi, sorry. Something like putting these in kubeproxy would need to understand the head protocol, or maybe users using head protocol in kubeproxy not being enabled to use it.
I don't think kubeproxy needs to interpret this because it's not doing any higher level protocol stuff.
So
right?
my question would be though, now this is really only used by the load balancer, but now we're putting it on every single node. I mean, in the cache for kubeproxy.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's big, but it's just a little more.
Yes.
For every endpoint slice.
Yeah. I mean, actually, we already mutate the objects on the way in and store them in the
Oh, do we?
mutated cache. Because
oh, okay.
They're just
we throw away the old stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Rob, fix that for us.
I tried. Yeah.
Do we have a common way to do that with infrastructure? Or is it just
You can create a custom informer too, but I don't think we know much. No.
We did something like that with accordions, but we replaced the process function.
Okay, so let's leave it open, I guess, just for another week or two, and then charge ahead. All right.
Sounds good. Thank you. Laszlo Trinosi, I think you're up next.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so I wrote in this cap about the mixed protocol support in service definition. Maybe you remember it was a issue in December that it should be a cap. And it's a kind of heads up that now there is a first draft. And I try to investigate the different cloud providers and different cloud load balancers from pricing perspective, what it would mean if additional protocol is implemented or added behind the same IP address or behind the same load balancer instance. So that is now in the cap. And also if there is a need for some option control, then there are some proposals in the cap for that, either as an annotation or similar to the current Metal LB implementation or GC workaround.
Okay.
So please check it if you think so and comment.
Thank you for writing, Ken.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anand?
Yeah, I'll pick this one up for Anand. Basically, there's a doc update that needs to be approved by Tim. So it's rubber stamp, it's gone through the doc team, and you are named as the reviewer. So if you can just throw a rubber stamp on that, be very much appreciated. It's just adding Azure CNI docs to upstream docs where all the CNIs are documented. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Lachlan. And then we're back to Rob.
Okay, I've got a couple quick ones. The first one is with endpoint slice. We realized that we need to split it into 2 different feature gates to do a seamless upgrade. The rationale is that you can't guarantee during a cluster upgrade process that all endpoint slices are going to be created by the time they would be consumed by kubeproxy. I imagine in 99% of use cases that would be the case. But since this is a single version jump, and since the endpoint slice controller would only be creating endpoint slices once a master changed, and then the first node, if not every single endpoint slice is up, if it's trying to read from those with kubeproxy, you're going to run into issues. Yeah. So there is a PR that splits that into 2 feature gates and enables the controller by default. Hoping we can get that into this upcoming release. So at least endpoint slices will be created by default, but not consumed by default until the release after that. So we can guarantee a smooth transition. Does that seem like a reasonable approach? Any questions, comments?
So usually, master update happens first.
Yeah.
Right. Usually that happens first. Yeah. But it doesn't. The problem is that it doesn't guarantee the wait's long enough for the controller to populate.
Yeah.
And slice.
Yeah.
Till the node pool, like the node start updating, or for some deployment, the node and master are equivalent. Right. That's the.
Yeah.
That's the.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the endpoint slice controller is limited by whatever the API rate limit is, and we have no idea what else might be consuming that rate limit. So you can't assume that endpoint slice controller is going to get all 20 QPS. It could be any number of things. So in a really big cluster with a lot of endpoint slices, it's potentially a problem.
And the way the kubeproxy support is written is it's one or the other. There's no merge of the 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and the alternative would be to write the merging logic that says read both and then take the union of them.
That's true. That seems, it would be very slow. They're very. You'd have to have watchers on 2 different resources, which would be the exact opposite of what we were trying to do with endpoint slice.
Also, consistency issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a temporary transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And I guess this just drags out.
But it does.
But this is where we are with the project. So.
Yeah.
Do we already mandate that you need to do sequential minor version upgrades? And you can't skip one? We do.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Every now and then we get something right, Casey.
All right, I'll move on to the next one then. This has been going on for a bit. It's clarifying ingress v1 and specifically what we're doing for path type there. So path type is a new idea into ingress, and we have implementation specific, which is basically what we've already done that's backwards compatible, but we're also adding path types that are prefix and exact, so you can be a little bit more clear for each path how you want it to be matched by whatever is implementing that ingress. There's been a long discussion around how we should default those, because this is adding a new attribute, but we also want it to be required at some point. And so I just want to bring attention to that, Kep. If you have any strong feelings on how we should approach path type, definitely add a comment there. I think we've reached a consensus for who was actually involved in that, Kep. But since this is a larger audience, take a look. And if you're interested in ingress v1 and the progress there, we're meeting every other week, just the opposite time of this meeting. So a week from today, it'll be ingress v1 instead of SIG network. So.
On the ingress v1 topic, if I can interject, Mr. Luciano, are you happy with the validation hack?
Yeah, I'm trying it out now. The difficulty I keep running into, though, is figuring out. So it's trivial to figure out, okay, you passed in v1 or v1 beta 1. Do you know if conversion code fires before validation, or is that only?
Conversion code fires before validation. So you're going to get the internal type, but the string that I passed in is the original API request.
Okay. So
it's not pretty, but there's precedent for it.
Right. So as soon as I say, like, if this is spec.backend, which isn't going to exist anymore, it says that doesn't exist, which kind of makes sense because we pass in to the validate ingress spec currently just the internal type, but we delete that because we are renaming it.
Right. So you can write the code in this case that checks the default backend field and then switches on the API version. And for V1 beta 1 spells it backend, and for V1 calls it default backend in the error message. It's ugly that it has to be open coded that way. There's an ongoing discussion about validating on real version types, but that has its own ugliness. So at least this lets you make progress.
Yeah, so it's fine to have like a bit of duplication, because I think that's what I'm gonna have to do. Basically say if you're passing this in and then you're using extensions v1 beta 1, just that's what I call the import, then there's gonna be a bit of duplication.
Duplicate, you shouldn't need to duplicate, you should just need to switch in the error path, right? Because the code is still processing the internal type. Maybe
the issue I keep getting is still, though, that the spec.backend, which is I'm passing in the internal networking ingress spec type, is always going to be set to default backend.
That's right. So I'm saying you only switch in the error message that you produce. The logic is going to operate on the internal type with the internal names. And then at the last second, if you detect that it has failed validation, you do an if clause to see if which name to put in the error message.
Oh, okay. I understand. So it doesn't really, I don't really need to validate the backend type. It's just if this thing fires at all, if you're V1, say this, if you're V2.
Yeah, it's really kind of dirty, right?
That makes a lot more sense. Yeah, so I should be able to finish that up, tomorrow morning. That's what I was working on today, but I got lost in the types thing.
Okay, cool. I'm sorry it took so long to come up with an answer for that. And we can thank the inimitable David Eads for coming up with that.
Yeah, it's no problem. Jordan was helping out too with a couple of examples that I'm cribbing from. So
awesome. Awesome. And whatever we do here is actually going to set precedent. So watch as other APIs rename fields across versions, they're going to copy this pattern.
Do you think that's going to force it to become better, or is this kind of like
I don't know.
Best-case scenario without a bunch of plumbing?
There's real ugliness in the other side of it too, right? The alternative is to take all the validation code, convert it to each version, and then duplicate it for each API version. And then extract the commonalities into common libraries, and that itself is a ton of work too. So that's the debate that Clayton and Jordan and David and myself are having. This is good enough for now.
Okay, great. So I should have that fixed tomorrow morning then.
Awesome, thanks. Let me
Should
know
I
when
resubmit
you're
it though
ready.
to upstream, or should we continue it in? Because Rob and I have been working in my branch too to create the monster PR.
That's up to you. I mean, eventually it'll come upstream, but let me know when you have something and I can take a look at it and make sure that I'm going to okay it for API review.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Cool. Rob, was there more you wanted to say or we're looking for?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. I wanted to quickly introduce KubeCon Amsterdam, which is coming up. Looks like Bowie's already. What's that?
Didn't we just finish KubeCon?
I know, right? I got this email the other day and was very thrown off. But yeah, the deadline for maintainer track sessions is January 20th, which is not next week, but the week after.
Yeah, I put a comment there. I can submit it, and then people basically reply and if you're going to be there, and then we can coordinate. After that.
Let's get it in. No reason not to submit it.
They said there may be a lack of room, so we should just submit it.
I mean, our sessions are always very well attended, so let's put it in, and we'll figure out what to do with it after.
Okay, so I'll email out after I submit the thing, and then anyone who's going to be there who's interested should just email.
Great. Thanks, Bowie. And then we just have one more item on the agenda, which was from Mike.
Yeah. Maybe I missed something, but it seems to me that Kubernetes is pretty good. In fact, I really like the Kubernetes control plane. It's a distributed system built with a lot of attention to resilience, to all sorts of crap that can go wrong. But there does seem to be one blind spot, or maybe I'm just missing something. But one of the failure modes that I see is if something goes wrong in the data plane that the CNI plugin establishes, nothing really detects that specifically. All right, there's health checks on containers. They'll restart containers. There's health checks on nodes, but nodes communicate over a host network, not the cluster network, right? So what I'm saying is it seems like there's kind of an opportunity or some kind of issue here where nothing is detecting the fact that the cluster network specifically has problems and reporting it per se.
So there's two things that we're working on upstream in CNI on that. And the first one was the CNI check command that got added to CNI sometime, I think like mid last year. And I believe that there is now support in Cryo for that command. And that's still on a per container basis, but that explicitly allows whatever CNI plugin is handling the networking there to check its control plane and return errors, at which point the pod will be terminated and then retried. So that's kind of the short-term fix. That check support needs to get into the Docker shim part for Kubernetes. And that's kind of been on a to-do list for somebody on my team for a while, but we haven't quite gotten there yet for Docker shim, but we did add it to Cryo. The second part is kind of the much longer term CNI gRPC, which would allow events from the plugin to go back to Cubase synchronously. But that's also kind of tied in with random discussions that are pretty early stage around what should the overall networking API look like for Kubernetes.
So both of those answers were really focused on the control plane, and I'm trying to specifically raise issues about the data plane.
Right. Part of that is that the check command for sandboxes specifically is supposed to do essentially, does this container have network access? And if the control plane is not working for the plugin, then you could argue that that container may or may not actually have network access. It depends on the control plane itself. But it's also intended to do things like, does this container still have an IP address? Does this container still have the resources that it needs to talk to the network? So it's kind of up to the network plugin itself to figure out what it thinks is container network health.
Okay, that's
so
something.
Basically, I think it's part of the solution, but it's probably not the entire solution. So any further thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be end to end, right?
No. Nope. I mean, it could be. It depends on what your network plugin is.
I think that's a real challenge. If depending on what network plugin you are, how do I know that you have connectivity when my pod might not actually be doing anything with the network? It might not have any open sockets. It might be network policyed off from egress, so I can't go in and poke out. Like you have to do it at the driver level, right? Mm-hmm. Like some ARP or something on the host to make sure you're getting something across that pipe if it's deep. Interesting. But is the idea then that check would be something that the runtime calls periodically?
Yeah, it would be part of the pod sandbox status. And that would get called every time pod sandbox status gets called through CRI. And the plugin can do as much or as little as it wants to do. And if it decides that for some reason the sandbox is unhealthy network-wise, then it would return an error. And then the expectation is that Kubelet would decide that that pod needs to be torn down and restarted.
What about ping? Right, that doesn't go to the user level. That just goes to the kernel. What if something somewhere else were to try to ping for each pod that's using container networking? What if something somewhere else tried to ping that pod's IP.
Could be network policy off, though. I mean, the network.
Right. Fair enough. Yes.
And actually,
Network policy naturally is going to.
network policy doesn't say anything about ICMP, but actually Kubernetes doesn't require ICMP to work. There were environments where ICMP doesn't work.
Yeah. We also have to think about what are our mitigation, like if we do like a service level health check, like what's the mitigation? The only mitigation we have is restarting pods, or destroying pods and recreating them. Like at that point, is there much more we can check? Like what are the failures we'd be checking by that service level health check that we can't check in these other CNI?
Right. I'm thinking of situations. I mean, I've seen two cases, right? One is something decays on a node, and then all the pods on that node that are using cluster networking become unreachable. And then the other case is something is wrong in the cluster, and everything is unreachable on cluster networking. Of course, in the latter one, there's no recovery, but you might like some kind of report that says, hey, your cluster networking is totally hosed. And in the other case, restarting, really blacklisting the node, and restarting the pods on other nodes would be the recovery.
Yeah, so check sort of works for some of that, but really the overall solution is something like CNI gRPC or some higher level protocol where the network plugin could indicate back to kubelet that the node itself is network unhealthy. We do have that check right now, and so you can sort of simulate this right now as long as you use something like a daemon set or something outside of kubelet to remove your CNI config file. And then depending on what CNI driver you use, that may trigger the node to go unhealthy if the config file is gone.
So if I can interpret Mike for a minute, I'm not actually sure that would be addressing the issue. What if, hypothetically, we've lost the route in the cloud provider, and so within the node, everything's happy, the gRPC, CNI, or the CNI check, or whatever, is all running fine. Even a local ARP or ping across a VETH pair will work fine. All pod health checks will be successful. The kubelet, because it's using the host network, will be reporting to the API server that all the pods are happy and healthy, but the pods themselves actually can't get in or out of the node.
So at that point, you'd need some kind of check in, the cloud provider or whatever thing is providing that interconnectivity for the node to say, hey, this is no longer healthy, and to, essentially exit or taint the node or something like that.
Well, I think in our style of doing things, right, we would want end-to-end behavior tests, right, not something that's tied to a particular implementation. I guess I also want to back up to again, this interesting point of what's the recovery and what are we really looking for. And I talked about problems in the node and in the cluster. So for the case of problems in the node, it suffices to actually have specific probe pods deployed for this. So you, for example, might have a deployment set a daemon set that has a test pod on every node, a simple test pod that should respond to something over the cluster network. And then you could have some end-to-end testing throughout the cluster, maybe some kind of voting on results to detect node level problems just by behavior.
Yep.
So this is making me think of something that I always think of when I see the weird network policy rule that the node is always allowed to connect to every pod so it can do health checks. And that's the fact that we don't really specify anywhere whether health checks are supposed to be testing if the pod server is working or if the network is working to the pod. But maybe this just makes sense as another kind of health check where we say explicitly we want some component to periodically test, can you make a network connection to this pod from an arbitrary place in the cluster? And if not, then something needs to happen.
So one of the discussions that came up through the Ingress v1 and Gateway APIs was, should we have a definition of health check on an ingress or even on a service level that would be driven by a network-oriented end-to-end health checking mechanism, not a pod-oriented or a kubelet-oriented.
That's necessary in a lot of use cases, I think.
I agree. I think to build a lot of higher level, or to integrate with a lot of higher level load balancers, you need an externally reachable health check. But we don't require it. So it's been challenging to try to figure out how do we make that work without requiring it. I'm not against the idea of a service level, God, like I hate adding service stuff, but adding a service level health check that defines behaviorally what does it mean for the pods behind the service to be alive.
Yes, although I'm still thinking about the node case. And maybe this is good because it's more compositional, right? It's if we can test that you can imagine all sorts of things, but if the case of something decays on a node, and we have something that can detect that, of course that'll help anything that's running on that node. And also, if you're testing the service, you don't know what went wrong if the service isn't healthy. Whereas if you're testing a node, you have a better idea of what went wrong.
The catch I've seen for trying to detect if something's gone wrong on a node is if the node doesn't fall over universally, it's very subjective to lay down when there's a problem and when there's not, such as if there's a problem with new resources or some kind of refresh.
So you're, let me see if I understand. You're saying
so
that.
Let's say that pods are failing to start because you're not able to assign new addresses or something. So it's clearly a node level problem, but it's not a case of everything on the node failing.
Okay. Yes. Right. If it's not consistent throughout the node, then that's a little harder. That gets back to the problem of how can we test every pod on the node rather than a probe pod on the node. It would be every pod that's using cluster networking. And that gets back to ping. I mean, maybe we want to just be doing something with ping where network policy allows it, or maybe define network policy to allow it, or have some way of inspecting network policy to see where it's allowed. And then someone who cared could deploy a daemon set just to make sure that there is at least a probe pod on every node using cluster networking. And then we could have something that's just pinging all the pods that use cluster networking and for which network policy allows pings.
Pod readiness plus is a one-way, or can it go unready? It's one way. Because you could have something external monitoring, flipping it as it were.
I mean, something maybe as an incremental step towards proving this out would be to write that prober, but actually write it as an operator that creates a daemon set, runs a probe, tears down the daemon set, and then periodically recreates the daemon set so that you're forcing it to allocate and reallocate IP addresses. So you bypass some of these, like it used to work, but now it doesn't problems.
Right.
It's going to be hell for thrashing on resources.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is something at Lyft that we've been fighting with a little bit. Our current idea is maybe defining a custom threshold, a percent of workloads that can go unhealthy on a node before we decide the node is unhealthy. Making like the daemon set new resource approach could work, but I worry that there's so many failure edge cases where a new resource might still succeed when there's a node level problem. It's just very hard to catch a non-universal failure.
Right. I mean, Tim, it's good to detect problems with new stuff, but there could also be the flip side, problems with just the old stuff.
Isn't
Maybe
that
things decay after a while.
The CNI check command that Dan was talking about? It's kind of the other half of this.
Well, that's, again, of undefined scope. I want to be sure to be doing kind of an end-to-end data plane test.
Right. And by undefined scope, it's up to the plugin to either make that a good check or a bad check.
Right, but the plugin has limited abilities since it's more or less a local actor.
Well, Many plugins would, but many plugins would be able to have larger sets of capabilities, especially if they run, a more centralized or smarter infrastructure, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess if you want the enterprise grade version of this, you've got something that runs in your cluster where each plugin reaches out to the cluster agent. You have two of them, so you're guaranteed one of them is not on your node. And they both have to reach in, and because the plugin knows all the details, it can say, hey, ping will work fine, or ping won't work fine, but you can do this other thing.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic, and I think it segues into the gateway and service health checking stuff nicely. It's hard to abstractly say we're going to cover every possible use case. I don't know if there's some root in real problems, Mike, or if maybe we could accumulate from people like Valerie who've got boots on the ground experience, what sort of problems they've really run into, that we could prioritize which things are important to try to address.
I'm not running production stuff myself, but in my own experience, cluster networking is something that fails.
Yep.
Yeah, I think gathering experience from people who do have it would be a great place to start. So I'll send out an email. I'll start an email thread on the mailing list, and maybe we'll gather some experience and think about what sort of. I want to focus really on what. Really, ultimately, the question is what remedies. Well, actually, remedies can be kicked upstairs and all sorts of stuff. So I guess what sort of conditions do we want to detect or could be detected, right? And what could automatically be remedied.
Well, we certainly can pull things out of a load balancer.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, thank you.
That's good. Thank you, Mike. All right, that's the end of the written out agenda. Are there any other last minute topics, or we get 5 minutes back?
Is there anybody here who is their first meeting, wants to say hi? Welcome to the new year. We should do that at the beginning of every meeting.
Yep. Hi, I'm Ryan Tidwell from Sousa. This is my first meeting, but the first one I attended was I think right after November, or right after Thanksgiving in November.
Okay.
But yeah, just getting up to speed here, looking for ways to help and contribute.
Awesome, welcome.
Hi, my name is James Peach. I work for VMware on Contour, which is an egress controller. So I'm just going to start showing up in the meetings just to keep an eye on what's going on in the network space more generally.
Hey, this is Aniket. I work with Red Hat. And I'm just getting up to speed on things, listening in, and also have attended a couple of meetings in the past, just getting at it in a more disciplined manner in the new year.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Kat. This is my first meeting. I'm in Azure networking, and I've been working on the application gateway ingress controller, so I wanted to get more involved and mostly listen in.
Cool, welcome. A lot of ingress people showing up, that's great.
Hi, I guess inside. Hi as well, my name is Klaus. I work on the EKS team on the AWS CNI, so in the CNI related stuff.
Cool, welcome. Man, I turned over a rock and I got a whole lot. How about that? Anybody here wants to say hi in the room?
Hi, this is Key. I work at Google as the GPD networking agent. I'm still new to the Kubernetes community, so I'm just here to learn.
Cool, welcome.
Yeah, and I'm Elena. This is my first meeting. I just joined the GK networking team at Google.
Welcome.
Welcome, everybody. That's great.
Awesome. Well, I hope y'all stick with us. We should do, I would love to do as a group, a once for the year backlog burn, one of these meetings. to go through not just the triage, but like all the things that we have triaged into bugs and see if there's any that are closable, or we can get some of these new contributors to help out with some of the low-level, low-hanging ones.
That'd be awesome. Just from my perspective, over the last couple months, I've been trying to find issues to kind of start dipping my toe in the water. And the minute I start trying to look at one, someone will jump in and they've got a PR for it, and away we go, and so on to the next thing. So it'd be helpful for me is, to get a little direction from the team, like where are some good places to jump in and help.
Sure.
Yeah, if you want to jump in, like leave a comment on whatever issue or PR or whatever you're thinking about, because lots of people, when they're going through PRs, if they see that somebody else has already claimed responsibility, they'll be like, oh, good, I don't need to touch this one. And so it'll be all yours.
The converse to that is, if somebody left a comment and it was 3 months ago and there's been nothing since, poke it, see if they're still there, leave another comment.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I guess that helps, because one of the questions I had is, how do you, how are we claiming issues? Is just assigning an issue to yourself enough of a tag that says, hey, I'm working on this.
So unfortunately, we can't assign issues to non-org members, but as you're working up to org membership, you can just say on the bug, hey, I'd like to take a look at this, and that's fair game.
Okay.
It's a great starting place. And people should not be shy about jumping on things. Like, don't worry about stepping on toes or those sorts of concerns. Like, there's plenty of work to go around. Not all of it is organized very well. And
okay,
frankly,
that's helpful.
If you get stuck, jump on Slack and we can talk.
Yeah, I joined a year ago. I can vouch for that.
Okay.
Great. Well, that's all the time we've got for today, but I will see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.